Win big in 2024 with RotoBaller.com's MLB Premium Pass. It includes our preseason draft kit, 15 exclusive lineup tools, and the Team Sync platform. Get customized rankings for your specific league format. Sync your leagues with Team Sync and use our new live draft assistant. Then get customized advice for your scoring settings. Get a discount for any MLB Premium Pass using my promo code KNUCKLER, KNUCKLER. Just visit RotoBaller.com, sign up today, and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Hop on, use my referral link and my referral code, RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got free contests. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. Hop in those player prop parlay contests. That is a really fun platform that a lot more people are getting onto, so join the action. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 121 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that, and we got UFC 297 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
I will be making picks for things like Unified MMA, Uriah Faber's A1 Combat, UAE Warriors, KSW this weekend. You can find those picks on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube. The UFC 297 starts this weekend at 6:30 p.m. on Saturday. That means I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord from 4 to 5 p.m. and onward talking the card. So come in, join us on Saturday, talk DFS and sports betting strategy for UFC 297. And yeah, you know, the first UFC event of 2024 is behind us. Not great results, for me at least. None of my big underdogs came through, but we did see some really awesome prospect performances from the likes of Joshua Van, Gene Silva, Fareed Basharat, Marcus McGee. Preston Parsons looked phenomenal. Bruno Ferreira got that first-round knockout. Mario Batista looked like a real bantamweight contender. Jim Miller looked legendary as always. Nicholas Mata got back in, winning fashion in a big way. Good for him. Waldo Cortez Acosta, on the other hand, did not look great in a unanimous decision victory over Andrei Arlovski, and he talked trash the entire time. It made it way worse. Magomed Ankalaev got that knockout win over Johnny Walker. That was, disappointing in how, I didn't predict it, but it's like, it's predictable in the sense that, like, God, I just wish that exactly what we thought might happen to Johnny Walker happened. It would have been really exciting if Johnny had won, and now it's just Magomed, beating all the guys that, he needs to beat once again. So, great for him. And the most disappointing thing about UFC Vegas 84 was that Manel Starboy Cop, who I talked up for like 20 minutes to half an hour on this podcast last week, misses weight by like 3.5 pounds, I believe it was. And the fight with Matheus Nicolau got called off. It ruined a lot of people's long-term futures on Manel Cop. It made me, it broke my heart. We didn't get to see him fight. It, made a lot of discussion about him worthless last week. Really hoping that he bounces back and makes weight the next time that he's supposed to fight.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
So anyway, let's move on to UFC 297 this weekend. It's going to be in Toronto, Canada. We got 12 fights on the card. This card was supposed to feature, too, I think Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria was originally supposed to be on this. Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira was, like, at some point rumored to be on that, I think. Jan Blachowicz versus Alexander Rakic, and Dominic Reyes versus Carlos Ulberg. Those fights are all off. Now, we have a flyweight fight between Malcolm Gordon and Jimmy Flick. Former Tap That Gas Jasmine Jazz Duvicius in a flyweight matchup taking on Priscilla Kuchera. That's a big one. Welterweight, Johan Lanessi, the Canadian, against Sam Patterson. Strawweight, Jillian Robertson, Canadian, taking on Polyana Viana. Bantamweight, Serhii Saidi, 10-1 professional from Canada, taking on Ramon Tavares. Featherweight, Canadian, Charles Jourdain taking on Sean Woodson. Bantamweight, the Ultimate Fighter two-time winner and Canadian Brad Katona taking on Garrett Armfield. Featherweight, big one at featherweight, Arnold Allen versus Movsar Evloev. Middleweight, the Action Man, Chris Curtis, number 12 ranked middleweight in the world according to Topology.com, against Marc-Andre Barriault, who is Canadian. Neil Magny, at welterweight, taking on Mike Mallet, who is Canadian. For the UFC vacant women's bantamweight championship of the world. A lot of people are going to be sleeping on it, for sure. But this is for a vacant UFC belt, so don't sleep on it. It's Raquel Pennington, 15-8, a long season staple of this division, against Mayra Bueno Silva. And for the UFC middleweight championship of the world, these guys are buddies now, apparently. Apparently the beef is squashed, and it's Sean Strickland, the guy who has a soundbite on the internet every day now, against Dricus du Plessis. Ooh. Really fun fights bottom to top. We're going to start at the bottom here, and we're starting off with Malcolm Gordon versus Jimmy Flick. Malcolm Gordon, the minus 205 favorite. Jimmy Flick, the plus 170 underdog. Let's start with Jimmy Flick. Okay? Because Jimmy Flick, I often get him confused with JP Buys. That's not fair because Jimmy Flick is at least 2-2 in the UFC. Started off with 2 straight wins, including the Contender Series. 2, an arm triangle choke and a triangle choke against Nate Smith and Cody Durden. Then 2 straight losses by knockout to Charles Johnson and Alessandro Costa. Malcolm Gordon, 2 wins out of 6 UFC fights. Those wins came back in July 2021 and February 2022. A UD against Francisco Figueiredo and a first-round knockout over Dennis Bondar. Granted, all right, so here's the thing. Malcolm Gordon has had a lot of tough fights in the UFC against, rising 2 of the biggest prospects in the flyweight division. His UFC debut was a submission loss to Amir Albazi. A first-round knockout victory over Suamata Hari. Loss. A third-round armbar loss to Muhammad Makayev, who he was able to, suplex once into a really good position. And then last time he got knocked out in the first round against Jake Hadley. I really like Malcolm Gordon. It is going to matter that these fans are fighting in Canada, or that they're fighting in front of Canadian fans. Jimmy Flick, I feel like the Charles Johnson and the Alessandro Costa losses are actually pretty telling. I feel like Malcolm Gordon has had much tougher competition. I feel like we started off high on Jimmy Flick, and now that has come way down, and kind of he had an opportunity to kind of include himself in that class of flyweight prospects, and he did not rise to the occasion. I don't know how I think Malcolm Gordon necessarily wins the fight, but I do think that maybe this is fight, maybe this fight ends inside the distance. Maybe it's, I think Malcolm Gordon wins this fight 65, 70 times out of 100. I'm not touching a straight-up victor here. Gordon by TKO knockout plus 165. I don't love that. Gordon by decision is plus 550. Flick by submission plus 300. I do think that is the best overall prop of the fight. I think that it's the most likely single outcome for either of the two fighters. I could see myself, using Malcolm Gordon in DFS, but I don't think that he's going to be, appropriately priced. But that is a solid flyweight fight to kick off this card in Toronto. Next up, we got Jasmine Jasudavicius against Priscilla Cachoeira in a women's flyweight matchup. I think UFC Stats is wrong on that one. Let's start with Jasmine Jasudavicius, who is the minus 380 favorite. Priscilla, the plus 300 underdog. Yeah, let's start with Jasmine. Jasmine, 4 wins in 6 UFC fights. Her only losses come to Natalia Silva, who did tear her up, and Tracy Cortez the last time out, who just did a little bit more than Jasmine did. She got 103 strikes to Jasmine 77. Jasmine did get 2 takedowns. Her big win that she got, to put her into the rankings in the UFC women's flyweight division was that unanimous decision victory June of last year against Miranda Maverick at UFC 289, outstriking her 67-63, 1 takedown for Jazz. Priscilla did lose to Miranda Maverick the last time out by a third round armbar, July of 2023 at UFC 291. She was coming off 2 straight victories before that against Ariane Lipski, who she knocked out in the first round, and Yi-Jeon Kim, who she beat by unanimous decision despite getting outstruck 170-102. She also has a loss to Jillian Roberts. It's like Priscilla is susceptible to some of these more... if you can outstrike Priscilla in the numbers, that naturally works too. She has been submitted by 2, like Jillian Robertson and Miranda Maverick, 2 people that are able to do that to you. Jasmine, that was a big win against Miranda Maverick. She showed a real, it was a limit to where she's at right now, September 2023 against Tracy Cortez. I think Jasmine wins this fight 60, 65, maybe even 70 times out of 100. I think minus 380, though, is ridiculous. So straight up, Priscilla plus 300, I think that makes sense. I think that's a better number. It's not one that I'm necessarily touching. I think that if you are going, with an individual prop, all of Jasmine's fights have gone the distance and have all ended in unanimous decision. I would say Jasmine by decision, minus 115, hit it. And for Priscilla, I think the way that she wins this is by staying off the ground and just landing more strikes than Jasmine does. Or landing in the triple digits. Because I do think that, Jasmine has kind of shown that it's really hard for her to land in the triple digits. And so I do think Priscilla could potentially out-volume Jasmine. So Priscilla by decision, plus 450. I don't know. I think Jasmine by decision, minus 115, actually the better number there. And I could see my way. Now, Jasmine might end up being, expensive as such a heavy favorite in DFS. If she is, no way. If she is in the $15 to $17 range, that is entirely possible that I give that a try. Next up, we got Johan Lainesse and Sam Patterson in a welterweight fight. Sam Patterson, the plus 120 underdog. Johan Lainesse, the minus 142 favorite. Let's start with Sam Patterson. Sam Patterson, a guy that I really enjoyed watching on the Contender Series when he was on September of 2022. He got that second-round rear naked choke victory over Vinicius Sensi. Lost his UFC debut, his real UFC debut, by a first-round knockout to Yanel Ashmouz. UFC 286, Ed Edwards versus Usman 3. Johan Lainesse, he is 4 years older. He's got what I would consider one real UFC victory against the likes of Darian Weeks. He has a Contender Series victory as well. The winner for Darian Weeks was a split decision, and my God, he only landed 23 strikes en route to that split decision victory. A second-round knockout loss to the likes of Gabe Green, and a first-round arm triangle choke loss to the Canadian prospect Mike Mallet, February of 2023 at UFC Fight Night Muniz versus Allen. Yeah, I think Sam Patterson kind of showed us what his limits are, especially when Yanel Ashmouz goes on to kind of get dominated by Chris Duncan. I think that, Johan is just a little bit beyond Sam Patterson. I think that this is more, more like the Darian Weeks fight. I think this is a fight that Johan could win even if he doesn't, put up the bigger volume numbers. And the guys that Johan has lost to in the UFC, and Gabe Green and Mike Mallet, I think are, solid fighters. Sam Patterson just a little less tested there. Johan is, what did I say, the minus 142 favorite. I think he wins about 65 of these fights out of 100. Minus 142, I like it. Go ahead and hit it. And, I think that if Sam Patterson gets this victory, I think that it just comes inside the distance, one way or another. Sam Patterson inside the distance, that's plus 175. Johan by decision, plus 750. Are you sure? Yeah, Johan plus 750 by decision. I think that's a really good number. And Johan by TKO knockout, that's plus 110. Perhaps, maybe that's crazy, but Johan by decision plus 750, I don't think that, maybe it's not the most likely that, maybe by TKO knockout is more likely, but does it warrant that, that discrepancy between those two odds? I don't think so. That's where I would go with if it was Johan. I am comfortable just going minus 142 with him. If I'm going Sam Patterson, it's inside the distance, plus 175. Next up, we got a women's strawweight matchup between Jillian Robertson and Polyana Viana. Jillian Robertson is the minus 305 favorite. Viana, the plus 245 underdog. Let's start with Polyana Viana. Loser of 2 of her last 3, but winner of 3 of her last 5, dating back to August of 2020. Some activity issues there. And, all of her victories have been inside the distance and in the first round. 2 submission victories over Emily Whitmire and Mallory Martin, and a first-round knockout over Jen-Yu Frey. The losses in that time, a unanimous decision loss to Tabitha Ritchie, where she outstruck her 36-33, but got taken down 5 times. And last time out, she lost by second-round arm triangle choke to Yasmin Lucindo. That was August of last year, UFC Fight Night, Luque versus Dos Anjos. I'm not going to go back, further than that. I don't think the fights matter as much, and it was before 5 fights ago, it was 2019 for her. Jillian Robertson, 3 years younger, born in 1995, winner of 2 of her last 3, and 3 of her last 5. That dates back to December of 2021. All 3 had been submission victories, a rear naked choke over Priscilla Cachoeira, a second-round rear naked choke against Maria Agapova, and a second-round armbar over Piera Rodriguez. She did lose a unanimous decision in that time to J.J. Aldridge and to Tabitha Ritchie. She got outstruck by Tabitha Ritchie 100-76 and taken down 3 times to 1. Losses also to Miranda Maverick and Tyler Santos in her UFC career. She's had a lot of fights in the UFC since 2017. Also wins over Molly McCann, Emily Whitmire, Veronica Hardy. Her losses have come to, really good competition when you spread it out over her time in the UFC. Viana, I do think the writing is on the wall here, both, for Jillian Robertson and in how this is going to end. I do think that just the way this is trending and how much more often Jillian Robertson's been able to fight, the quality of her wins, over the last couple of years, I think Robertson does win this fight, 75 times out of 100. I don't know if that warrants minus 305, and I don't know if I'm taking a straight-up victor here. But Robertson by submission, plus 120, hit it. And I think that if you're going to beat Jillian Robertson, I think that Polyana is going to probably have to do it, I don't know. It makes sense that she probably have to do it by decision, but she has never won by decision in her UFC career. So maybe she would have to do it by TKO knockout. I don't know, that's plus 800, but Viana by decision is plus 750. By submission, plus 700. So the props just do not like any outcome of victory for Polyana Viana. Steer clear of that one. I think Jillian Robertson is going to be popular in DFS this week. Hopefully around the $18 to $19 range. Look for Jillian to snap in a rear naked choke or an armbar on Saturday. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup between Serhi Saidi and Ramon Taveras. Saidi, the minus 185 favorite. Taveras, the plus 154 underdog. Let's start with Ramon Taveras. 2 contender series fights to date, both ended. Yeah, this is a rematch. That is weird. It's a weird thing so quickly and so, early for both these guys to have a rematch. But Ramon Taveras got knocked out by Serhi Saidi in the contender series September of 2023 in the first round. He comes back October of 2023, gets a first-round knockout on the contender series against Cortavius Romeus. Saidi, who was born in 1996, he will be at a 2-inch reach advantage. Saidi, that's his one win at the UFC level has been in the contender series, and it was that first-round knockout over Taveras. For Saidi, he is a 10-1 professional, ranked as the number 1 bantamweight in Canada. 27 years old. He looks like for God's sake, he looks like the Canadian Sage Northcutt. ranked 116th in the world according to Tapology. 6 wins by knockout in his career, 2 submissions, 2 decisions. His only loss is by decision to Matteo Vogel in BTC 9 back in February of 2020. He is on a 6-fight winning streak. That included winning the BFL Bantamweight Championship and the BTC Bantamweight Championship. Really, like, solid opponents at the, the Canadian regional level over the last 3 or 4. You like to say against Ali Wasuk and Walel Watson, Austin Russell. His only loss to Matteo Vogel, that's a dude who, we have at least seen at the Contender Series level. And he's been in Cage Fury as well. He's fought guys like Garrett Armfield and Damon Blackshear. So that is a really, very respectable loss for the young Saidi. Then, we go to Ramon Tavares, who we've already talked about a little bit, 30 years old. 2 losses by knockout. 1 came to Saidi, for the love of God. Edward Massey, who actually, that's a shared opponent with good friend of the podcast, Ilyas Mamadalayev. But he spent time at Combat Night Pro. That's where he spent the majority of his career, is Combat Night Pro. Had a good amateur career. I believe less in the wins that he's gotten, except for the Contender Series win. I don't see any difference or any reason why this shouldn't end in the same way, because he got knocked out in the first round by Edward Massey as well. And Saidi, in his last 6 fights, 5 of his last 6 have finished inside the distance, and 4 of those have been by knockout. Only, 1 ended in championship rounds. 1 was a second-round knockout. The rest came in round 1. So, I don't know. Maybe Tavares has, a number of tricks up his sleeve to survive longer in this fight. I think Saidi wins this fight 75 times out of 100, maybe even 80. Minus 185, I kind of like it. So, I kind of hit it. Missed it. There we go. And I think he goes Saidi by TKO knockout, plus 150. I think that is by far the most logical choice. And I think if you don't go Saidi by TKO knockout, just go Saidi inside the distance, plus 110. It's not that big of a difference. It'll cover the submission. But, the 2 losses for Tavares in his career, both have been by first-round knockout. One of them was to the same guy that he is going to be fighting on Saturday. Next up, we got a featherweight matchup between Charles Jourdain and Sean Woodson.
Break out the red panties.
Charles Jourdain is the minus 218 favorite, fighting in front of this Canadian crowd. Sean Woodson, the plus 170 underdog. Let's talk about Sean Woodson first. Sean Woodson, a guy that, got a lot of steam behind him. He, besides the loss to Julian Erosa, who, he outstruck him 106 to 103. He did get taken down 3 times. He even got a knockdown against Julian Erosa back in June of 2020, but ended up getting Darce choked in the 3rd round. He had that draw against Luis Saldana by split. It was a split draw in August of 2022. He only fought once in 2023. He's fought, on August 2 years in a row to date, and that was it. And that was a win against Dennis Bajuka, August of 2023, unanimous decision, outstriking Dennis 71 to 42 and landing 4 takedowns to 0. Other wins, the best one, I don't know, probably like Yusuf Zalal. Colin Anglin was like an easy kind of first-round knockout victory where Sean Woodson kind of shut him out at UFC Fight Night Holloway versus Rodriguez. It was a really close victory over Yusuf Zalal, too. He also has a win over Kyle Bochniak, where he landed 111 strikes for a unanimous decision, and he beat Terrence T-Rex McKinney by a second-round flying knee when he was in the Contender Series in 2019. Charles Jourdain will be, by the way, at a 9-inch reach disadvantage against the Sniper. He is Charles Air Jourdain is 3 years younger than the Sniper, about. Charles Jourdain, especially going back to the loss against Shane Burgos, I thought that he should have been the winner of, I think he should be the winner of 5 of his last 6. It is 4 of the last 6. He landed 137 strikes against Andre Ewell, a first-round guillotine over Lando Veneta. He landed 113 strikes to Shane Burgos' 42 and got taken down twice and lost a majority decision. Was in a close fight against Nathaniel Wood that he ultimately was on the wrong side of on the judges' scorecards. 97 strikes for Wood, 86 for Jourdain, 5 takedowns to 1 for Wood. Then he bounces back with 2 wins in a row, a UD over Kron Gracie where he lands 80 strikes, and a first-round guillotine over Ricardo Ramos last time out, September of 2023. This is another one, too, where it's like, look, I think Sean Woodson, if this fight stays on the feet, I think Sean Woodson makes this a closer fight than the odds kind of suggest. I think minus 218, I think Charles Jourdain probably wins this fight 60 times out of 100, giving credit for the Canadian crowd. But he's taken plenty of losses to, similar competition. And, his best win, I don't know, I would like to count it as Shane Burgos, but it wasn't a win. It was a very close loss. Ramos, great, all of a very similar caliber. Maybe Sean Woodson has a slightly better, victory, best victory. I think that Sean Woodson, probably the more likely of the two to get the knockout. Jourdain, the more likely to get a submission. I think that this could end up being a really close decision that would most likely be the result of, Charles Jourdain landing his strikes in volume, Sean Woodson keeping a decent pace, maybe one of them landing a bigger shot, Sean Woodson maybe getting a couple of takedowns. I think that's a recipe for a close decision. But, if I was going to bet a straight-up victory, I'd go Sean Woodson, because I think plus 170 is a much more fair number than Air Jourdain at minus 218. I think Jourdain by decision plus 200 is a really good number. Woodson by decision plus 250, I think that's fine. Woodson by TKO knockout plus 700. It proves really hard to beat Charles Jourdain by knockout. I don't think, it's never happened by anyone in the UFC. The way that Charles Jourdain has lost, his last 2 fights by decision, and every other one in the UFC besides the Darce loss to Julian Erosa. So I think if Sean Woodson does get the victory, it probably ends up being by decision. So plus 250 is a solid number. To Sean Woodson, because there's been a lot of critics on the internet this week. I will say,
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
Try not to worry about that Canadian crowd, Sean. I think that this is a very winnable fight for you. I still think that Charles Jourdain wins the majority of these fights. I think he does it by decision. I think that's the best number. You could go Jourdain by submission plus 600 if you're feeling froggy, but I've made it clear what I think the best picks there are. And I think these guys will be rather affordable in DFS for several different lineup variations. I think I'll end up going Charles Jourdain in the most cases. But there might be situations where Sean Woodson just happens to fit into my lineup perfectly with what his price is. We shall see. Next up, we've got a bantamweight matchup between 2-time Ultimate Fighter winner Brad Katona, whose girlfriend Katie Saul is a former guest on this podcast, and Garrett Armfield. Brad Katona, the minus 218 favorite. Armfield, the plus 180 underdog. Let's start with Garrett Armfield. Lost his UFC debut by second-round arm triangle choke to David Onama, and he is coming off a first-round knockout victory August of 2023 against Toshiyomi Kazama. That was on UFC Fight Night Holloway versus the Korean Zombie. Kazama had lost, after that 2 in a row. He had been on road to UFC. His other loss was to Rinya Nakamura. Love Rinya Nakamura. So that's what Garrett Armfield's done. Born in 1996, he's a young dude, and it's really unclear, what those losses and wins mean for him in his UFC career. Brad Katona, born in 1991, and let's see, let's really go to Brad Katona's Tapology because it'll have his non-UFC Ultimate Fighter fights. Katona, ranked as the 58th bantamweight in the world. His head coach is John Kavanagh. He's fighting out of Dublin, Ireland. Ranked as the number 62 bantamweight in the world. 9 of his career wins by decision, 3 by submission, 1 by knockout. So let's go to the Ultimate Fighter. Let's go to the Ultimate Fighter the first time. He got wins over Kyler Phillips and Bryce Mitchell. Very impressive. Then, his 2 losses. My God, one was to Hunter Azur in a close fight. The other was to Marav Divalashvili. And I always hope I'm saying it right, but, whatever. It's just so crazy. You win the Ultimate Fighter, you win a couple fights, in a row, and, even after the Ultimate Fighter, you lose 2 in a row by unanimous decision, one to a guy that ends up being a championship contender, and you're out? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He bounces back with 4 wins in Brave CF against really solid competition with hard-to-pronounce names. That's always a good indication. Then he comes back on Tough 31, gets a UD win over Carlos Vera, a split decision victory over Tamir Valiev, and that's a really, good win. If you just got that win in the UFC, we'd be like, wow, it's a solid win. And then he beats Cody Gibson in the Ultimate Fighter finale by unanimous decision. He got outstruck 164 to 160, but he won the unanimous decision on the judges' scorecards. I believe it was 130-27 by Chris Lee, but 229-28 for Superman Brad Katona in that fight. I wish that I saw that this line was better earlier in the week. Real quick, to go to Garrett Armfield, the 9-3 pro, fighting out of Florida. He went to college at Missouri State. That's meaningful. 6 wins by knockout, 2 wins by submission, 1 by decision. He also has a loss to Mateo Vogel. So that's a common theme of this card. He also has a loss to former UFC veteran Ronnie Lawrence in his career. He lost to David Onama in his last amateur fight. God, what are the odds that you make your way back to fighting David Onama all that time later? Not a whole lot to love. Garrett Armfield, I think, is promising, but there's just not a whole lot in his professional resume to tell you that, he belongs at this level and is going to be able to rise. Every big fight that he's had, when you look back at guys that have gone on to do something, he lost it. And the one exception has been beating the Japanese prospect, the 26-year-old, the silent finisher, Toshiomi Kazama. So that's a good win, for Armfield, but Brad Katona is just too damn good at this, man. It's why I picked him to win the Ultimate Fighter again. It's a special kind of guy that can do that one, but Brad Katona is just really good at making fights close and winning rounds. He's really good at doing that, especially when he's got the skill advantage on you, and I think that's going to be the case. I think that, Brad Katona, his last 5 fights, all of his fights in the UFC, for real, all his fights on the Ultimate Fighter, those are by unanimous decision. So I think Brad Katona wins this fight 75 times out of 100. I'm not touching a straight-up victor here again. Maybe I go Katona in, DFS. I could see that. But, Katona by decision plus 110, absolutely hit it. If I'm going Garrett Armfield, I don't know. I think maybe you just go Garrett Armfield, maybe inside the distance. But I think, if you're going to take a flyer on Garrett Armfield, I think you probably go Armfield by knockout. If it's a fight that goes the distance, it's a fight that was an advantage for Brad Katona. Armfield by TKO knockout, that is plus 450. That is my favorite pick for him. Next up, we got Arnold Allen and Movsar Evloev. We got 5 fights left. This is a featherweight matchup between the guys currently ranked number 4 and number 6 in the world, respectively, according to Tapology.com. Arnold Allen is the plus 160 underdog. Movsar Evloev, the minus 192 favorite. This is one fight on the card where neither guy is Canadian. It's just a good fight. Let's start with Arnold Allen. Was on a hell of a winning streak from June of 2015 to October of 2022. Wins over the likes of Mads Burnell, Makwan Amirkhani, Gilbert Melendez, who he outstruck 102-23, Nick Lenz. It's been a lot of decision victories too, by the way. He finally started knocking people out recently. He got a unanimous decision victory over Sadiq Youssef April of 2021, despite getting outstruck 47-21. He landed 2 takedowns and got a knockdown. Got that first round knockout of Dan Hooker March of 2022. Then gets a second round knockout against Calvin Kattar October of 2022. So 2022 is a big year for Arnold Allen. His last time out, he gets doubled up in the striking numbers by Max Holloway, about doubled up. Let's say 150, almost doubled up. 147-76 for Max Holloway, who's going to be fighting Justin Gaethje at UFC 300. Let's go.
Break out the red panties.
But, very respectable result from Arnold Allen last time out to land 76 strikes on Max Holloway and not get finished. That's something there. Movzar, also born in 1994, he will be at a 2-inch reach advantage over Almighty Allen. Movzar has not lost in the UFC since April of 2019. Wins over Sungwoo Choi, Enrique Barzola, Mike Grundy, Nick Lentz, Hakeem Dawodu, who he took down 9 times, by the way. Got 9 takedowns over Dan Ige, outstriking him 68-42, and 4 takedowns against Diego Lopez, his last fight, May of 2023, and outstruck him 88-37. That is 22 combined takedowns over his last 3 fights, and 2 really, high-quality wins in that time, and a solid win in Diego Lopez. Every single fight that Movzar has been in has ended with a unanimous decision victory, except for the split decision victory over Nick Lentz. We haven't, seen Arnold Allen again. He did get taken down 6 times by Mads Burnell. He did eventually get the sub over Mads. He got taken down 4 times by Makwan Amirkhani, but Makwan was able to take him down 3 times. So this is not a common problem that Arnold Allen has run into. His 2 biggest wins have been guys like Calvin Kattar and Dan Hooker, who, really like to bang. So I think that odds-wise, I think that this is pretty fair. I think Movzar wins 65-70 of these fights out of 100. Minus 192, I don't hate it. If Arnold Allen was even plus 175, maybe I'd think about giving that a shot. It's just different when you're taking on a guy like this as opposed to a guy like Dan Hooker or Calvin Kattar. It just is. Now, taking down Arnold Allen might be a little different than taking down the likes of Dan Ige and Hakeem Dawodu. But I think if Movzar gets, his 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 takedowns, I think it's going to be, I think that's going to be his fight for the taking. And it gives us a much easier prop decision here. Movzar by decision, minus 150. Hit it! If I'm going Arnold Allen, I think you probably go by decision. I think he outstrikes Movzar, and I think he's able to use his striking to stay off of his back. Allen by decisions plus 330, but I think he's also the more likely of the two to get the inside the distance victory. Allen by TKO knockout is plus 750. I think that might actually be a better value than Allen by decision. That's going to be a really exciting one. Looking forward to it. 4 fights left, and next up we got a middleweight matchup between Chris the Action Man Curtis and Marc-Andre Barriault. Barriault is the plus 154 underdog. The Action Man, the minus 185 favorite. Let's start with Marc-Andre Barriault, the Canadian. Nicknamed Power Bar. That's pretty sweet. Winner of 3 of his last 4 fights against, solid lower to middle tier middleweight competition. Jordan Wright, a first-round guillotine. Julian Marquez, a second-round knockout. And Eric Anders, a unanimous decision June of 2023 at UFC 289. His loss in that time was to Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who outstruck him 39-25 and got 8 takedowns around to a 3rd-round arm triangle choke victory. And before that, he was on a 2-fight winning streak against Abu Azatar and Dalcha Logiambula. He landed 118 strikes and 141 against each of those 2, respectively. So his last, 3 losses, and this has to date all the way back to December of 2019, is Anthony Hernandez, Chidi Njokuani, and Jung Young Park. It was a no contest, his win that was overturned against Oscar Piachota. Chris the Action Man Curtis. He was that great story from a while ago. He comes into the UFC after retiring 4 different times in his career, twice in one night in the PFL, when he was fighting Magomed and the likes of Ray Cooper. Gets that upset first-round knockout victory over Phil Hawes. Shocks the world again with a second-round knockout victory over Brendan Allen. Gets into the rankings. Gets that decision victory over Rodolfo Vieira. Avoids the submission. Lands 109 strikes. But then he worked himself up into a certain echelon. And, he ran into a wall. He got really pieced up on the feet by Jack Hermanson July of 2022. He lost that decision victory to Kelvin Gastelum April of last year at UFC 287. He got a win in between there, a second-round knockout over Joaquin Buckley. Last time out, it was the no contest against Nasruddin Imavov. He got outstruck 57-26, taken down 3 times. but that was the fight that ended in no contest due to the accidental clash of heads. So, those last three results that aren't wins came against really good competition at middleweight. You got to give him credit for that. But it does seem like the likes of Brendan Allen, Joaquin Buckley might be the ceiling for Chris Curtis in the UFC. Is he possibly a ranked middleweight fighter? Sure. Do I think that he'll ever ascend past number 12, even with a big victory? That's looking less and less likely. He's been around in the game for a long time. Now, I do think that this is a situation where, I think the odds are fair. I think Chris Curtis wins this fight. I think that this is like a 65 to 70 time out of 100 thing. I don't know if I love minus 185. I could see liking either of these guys' prices in DFS. The thing about Barriault is that he's really good at landing volume strikes. His last 4 wins, he landed at least 95 strikes and 3 times ended up in triple digits. Or his last 3 wins made it into the 3rd round, basically. So he can add those punches up. I do think that of all, like for what Chris Curtis' ceiling is, I think Marc-Andre Barriault also has a ceiling, and I think it's a little bit lower than the likes of Chris Curtis. Barriault has been knocked out once in the UFC by Chidi Njokuani. Chris Curtis' last 4 wins at the UFC level, or 4 of the last 5, have come by knockout. He was only able to get the decision victory against Rodolfo Vieira, mostly because he's trying to avoid going to the ground. So I think, Chris Curtis could make sense at minus 185. I wish Marc-Andre Barriault, if he was plus 170, plus 175, or plus 185, anywhere in that range, I'd think about him just a little bit more, because maybe on his best night and on a bad night for Chris Curtis, he can get that win. But Curtis by TKO knockout, plus 240, I like it a lot. Curtis by decision, plus 140. I think those numbers are of about equal value. I think that maybe he will want to avoid... it's not like he's going to have to avoid, takedowns by, Marc-Andre Barriault. If he wants to stay off the ground, I think that they'll be able to do that. And it's only in, moments of danger that Barriault will try to go to the ground. So, let's go ahead and go a little bit riskier. Curtis by TKO knockout, plus 240. And then I would go Curtis by decision, plus 140. For Barriault, by submission is plus 1,600. Maybe that's where the flyer. By TKO knockout is plus 450, which I guess he was able to do to Julian Marquez. And, I guess... Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I like an inside the distance victory for Barriault. I think if I'm going Barriault, it's by decision, plus 400, but I don't like many, methods of victory props for MAB. Next up, we got 3 fights left. We got Neil Magny and Mike Mallet in a welterweight matchup. Neil Magny, the plus 285 underdog. Mallet, the minus 360 favorite, and he will be fighting in front of a home Canadian crowd. These guys are ranked number 13 and number 41 by Tapology, respectively, in the world at 170 pounds. Let's start with Neil Magny. Loser at 2 of his last 3. He is 2-2 in his last 4 fights. This is a guy. It's so hard to judge the results of Neil Magny because, he starting May of 2021, he beats Jeff Neal by unanimous decision. Max Griffin by split decision. He has to fight a killer known as Shavkat Rakhmonov. Loses by second-round guillotine, June of 2022.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
And really, I don't mean that, because Shavkat's a killer. But it is fights like that kind of show us what the limits in Neil Magny are at this point in his career. Gets the third-round Darce choke victory over Daniel Rodriguez, November 2022. Loses early in the fight to Gilbert Burns. Gets a win over Phil Rowe by split decision. Then his last time out gets pieced up 91-27 and taken down twice against Ian Gary.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
Ultimate MMA Internet heartbreaking loss. People love Neil Magny. They hate Ian Machado Gary, but Ian Gary looked really good his last time out against Neil Magny. Mike Mallet, only 4 years younger than Neil Magny. He is 4-0 in the UFC, counting the Contender Series. All fights that he's been in have ended inside the distance. 3 submissions, 1 knockout. All three of his first fights ended in the first round. His last fight against Adam Fugit was a second-round guillotine, June of 2023 at UFC 289. His other wins came against Shimon Smotrinsky, Mickey Gall, and Johan Lanesi. So, I count 2 all right wins in there. Maybe 3 all right if we stretch the definition of that. But they've come, really impressively. And I think Mike Mallett's going to be quite popular in DFS this week. I've gotten suckered into a few of these, Neil Magny against prospect fights where I was I think Neil Magny has, a chance. And because I'm going the other way, maybe something crazy happens on Saturday. But I think that Neil Magny probably loses this fight by decision. I think Mallett wins the fight 75, 80, 85 times out of 100. So I don't like a straight-up victory here because Mallett's at minus 360. Mallett, by submission, is plus 110. I love it. Hit it. If I was going to go Neil Magny, I'd probably go by decision. That is plus 500. I don't think that number's high enough, really, for me to want to take a chance. I think Mike Mallett is probably going to be in the high teens to lower 20s in DFS. That's on FanDuel. And in DraftKings, he could be approaching the upper 8,000s, lower 9,000. So that might be one to look out for. But that should be interesting. I love to see Neil Magny. It's amazing what he's done in his career. And Mike Mallett's looking to get a huge name victory in front of the home Canadian crowd. So there's a good story behind it either way. We are to the co-main event of the evening.
Break out the red panties.
And they're fighting for the vacant UFC Women's Bantamweight Championship. It is Raquel Pennington against Mayra Bueno Silva. MBS, Bueno Silva, the minus 166 favorite. Raquel Pennington, the plus 140 underdog. Let's start off with Raquel Pennington. She started off in the UFC November of 2013. She has fought everybody at this weight pretty much. A win over, starting from the beginning, a win over Roxanne Modafferi. A win over Ashley Evans-Smith. A loss to Jessica Andrade. A loss that she later avenged. A loss to Holly Holm. She beat Beth Correa. Miesha Tate she beat November of 2016. Lost to Amanda Nunes and Jermaine de Rondani, who were the best 2 in the world by far at the time. And she lost to Amanda Nunes in a title fight. Now, starting in July of 2019, it has not been a high activity level for Raquel Pennington. She had to take, I think, some time off. But, still, over a period of years, was only able to fight once, maybe twice in a year. But July of 2019, she beats Irene Aldana by split decision. She loses a UD to Holly Holm in their second fight. Then rattles off 5 in a row, June 20th, 2020 to January of last year. 4 decisions, 1 submission victory. She outstruck Marion Renault 107-46 for a unanimous decision. She wins a close decision against Pani Kianzad, who outstruck her 50-48 and 1 takedown each. Macy Chiasson, that's where she got the second round guillotine. She outstruck her 45-26 December of 2021 on the Derek Lewis versus Chris Dawkins card. Her last 2, April of 2022, a unanimous decision victory where she pieced up Aspen Ladd to the tune of 114 strikes to 65. She did get taken down twice. And last time out, she gets another split decision victory over Ketlin Vieira, outstriking her 81-64. She had 2 29-28 scorecards for that victory. She was born in 1988. Mayra Bueno Silva, 3 years younger. And, this is a weird one, too, because, Mayra Bueno Silva had won 3 in a row, and they weren't, awesome victories, by the way. Yanan Wu, Stephanie Egger, Lena Landsberg, she finished 2 of those by submission, but those just aren't, awesome names to beat. Then she beats Holly Holm by a second-round guillotine. That fight was later overturned to a no contest because she failed the pre-fight drug test. In her career, also has losses to Mariana Moros and Manon Furiot, has a draw with Matana de la Rosa back in February of 2021. Other wins over Jillian Robert. Already, as I'm talking about this, it was a good win for Mayra Bueno Silva against Holly Holm. But, I am just very concerned about the quality of wins that she has had, leading up to the Holly Holm fight. And how's the way that no contest happened going to affect, any training that went into this one? Maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe it does some. That could be a problem. I actually think I like Raquel Pennington here. I would, this fight's closely handicapped for a reason. I'm probably not going to be liking either of these two in DFS. But Raquel Pennington has a really good proclivity. If the age difference was a little more, if Raquel was a little older, if Mayra Bueno Silva was a little younger, if Mayra Bueno Silva had, just a little bit more on her resume, if Raquel had a little less, but I think that this is shaping up for me to go ahead and say, I think that this is about a 50-50 fight, maybe even, I'd say 50-50. I'll stop there. Raquel Pennington as the underdog, plus 140, hit it. And let's go ahead, let's say Raquel Pennington by decision, and probably a close one, close statistically and close on the scorecards. Pennington by decision, plus 200. Give it to me. If I'm going Mayra Bueno Silva, what do? I think I go decision because it's really hard to finish Raquel Pennington. I think that it's harder to pick one, slightly harder to pick a method of victory for MBS. I would say MBS by submission, plus 165 probably makes the most sense. And then I would say MBS by decision plus 330. But I think, simplify this. Raquel Pennington straight up money line underdog. Raquel Pennington by decision. I love those numbers there. And it's going to seem anticlimactic. People are going to make jokes if Raquel Pennington ends up being the UFC Bantamweight Championship. People have been saying for months that nobody cares about this fight. I respectfully disagree. I love the UFC Women's Bantamweight division. Bring back the UFC Women's Featherweight division. Let's go. I mean, it's not officially gone or anything, but they've been talking about that for a while, and I'd hate to see that happen. Don't take divisions away. Add a division. Add the UFC Women's Atomweight division. Should have been here from the inception of women's MMA in the UFC. And now, we are on to the main event of the evening.
Break out the red panties.
For the UFC Middleweight Championship of the world, we got Sean Strickland, the minus 115 favorite, against Dricus du Plessis, the minus 105 underdog. Let's start with Sean Strickland. All right. It might seem like a while ago. It might seem like just yesterday, all at the same time. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. In fact, he's won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of his last 11 fights over that stretch of time. Because he also, he's got fights with Kamaru Usman back earlier in his UFC career at welterweight. Wins over Jack Marshman, Brendan Allen, Nordine Talib, Christoph Jacko, Uriah Hall, Jack Hermanson. Then he loses 2 in a row, a knockout loss to Alex Pereira, July 2022, and a split decision loss to Jared Cannonier, where he outstruck him 152 to 141, December of 2022. Then went on, this is how you know an upset was going to happen in the championship fight. Goes on a really, solid but, not that impressive 2-fight winning streak against Nasruddin Imavov, where he lands 182 strikes to Imavov's 123, January of 2023, and then gets a second-round knockout victory over Abus Magomedov, gets a title shot against Israel Adesanya, and wins by unanimous decision, outstriking him 137-94 with a knockdown. A huge upset, one of the biggest of the year. Sean Strickland is a name on everybody's lips for the year, as one of the fighters of 2023, and he is the UFC Middleweight Champion. Dricus still knocks du Plessis. Has not lost in the UFC. He used to be the EFC middleweight champion, I do believe. He might have even been their light heavyweight champion, too. Let's check on this. because he fought in EFC and KSW. He was actually the KSW welterweight and the EFC middleweight champion. Love both of those organizations. And I love that, Dreykus was a multiple champion in high up organizations. Love to see that. Still Knox. He's now got, it doesn't seem like it, but 5 of his 6 UFC victories have come inside the distance. 4 have been by knockout. 1 was a neck crank, and then 1 by decision. So he gets a first-round knockout over Marcus Perez, October of 2020. A second-round knockout over Trevin Giles. Next up, a unanimous decision against Brad Tavares where he outstrikes him 113-82. Gets that neck crank against Darren Till and lands 6 takedowns against Darren Till, December of 2022 at UFC 282. Second-round knockout. Last time out 2 fights ago against Derek Brunson, March of 2023 at UFC 285, Jones vs. Gane. He was able to withstand the grappling and the wrestling of Derek Brunson, survive, and stay out of the control of Derek Brunson, which is no non-impressive feat. Or it is an impressive feat, however I put that. Last time out, July 8, 2023, UFC 290, Volkanovski versus Rodriguez. He was matched up with one Robert Whittaker. A Robert Whittaker who had occupied a tier of his own in the UFC middleweight division for years and years and years. For years. It was Israel Adesanya, number 1. No one could touch him. Robert Whittaker, a clear number 2. The only person that he couldn't touch was Israel Adesanya. And then there was everybody else. The Costas, the Romeros, the Hermans, all those people. Then Dreykus Duplessis, plus 285 underdog, maybe even bigger, gets the second round knockout victory, puts Robert Whittaker away. Crazy upset. No one saw that coming. If anything, it's like, Robert Whittaker, didn't get finished, in his second fight with Israel Adesanya. He has always proven to be an incredibly hard person to finish. And Dreykus Duplessis did it as a huge underdog. And it was a win that made it almost undeniable that he was going to be one of the next people to fight for the UFC middleweight championship. So, where do we go from here? I think that, Dreykus Duplessis' winning streak has almost been as impressive as Sean Strickland's. And the only reason that Sean Strickland's is more impressive is because it included a win in a 5-round fight against Israel Adesanya for the UFC middleweight championship. So, I don't know exactly how I think that this fight goes down. I think that there's a couple of really clear ways that it could. So, it's going to be a test for Dreykus Duplessis to go 5 rounds. His gas tank has been an issue in the past, but they do think that that's been fixed. What was it, his nose surgery or something like that? This is a really closely handicapped fight. I do think that it's about 50-50, but I think that you have to give a little bit more to Sean Strickland, 55 out of 100. I'm torn because, for instance, in DFS, I could see my way to using both of these guys if they're, I think they'll be priced fairly because of how close this fight is. My heart says Dreykus Duplessis. My head just doesn't know what to say based on the numbers and the results that I'm seeing. I think that method of victory-wise, Sean Strickland by decision makes the most sense at plus 300. And I think Dreykus Duplessis by knockout plus 215 is his best method of victory. If I had to pick one of these guys, I'd probably go Strickland. But, the thing about Duplessis is, he really, I think that his striking style of kind of barreling for throwing hard shots, if he's able to maintain that gas tank, that might be enough to, cut through the weird striking style that threw off Israel Adesanya so much. And what all of Sean Strickland's training partners have described as such a weird style that gives you pause. This is a really, really close middleweight fight. I would love to say Dreykus Duplessis. But I do think that I think the odds makers got this right. I think you have to give a very slight leaning to Sean Strickland, and that's what they have done. But I could see -1 especially if that goes into plus money for Dreykus before the fight, then I'd be willing to take him, straight up. But those are the methods of victory I like. I'd like to be able to, especially Sean Strickland, or either of these guys, really, because there's going to be I think Sean's going to be a little bit more expensive in DFS, but I don't think it's going to be much. I think if it's a 5-round fight, I think he lands a really good volume of strikes. And if Dreykus wins, I think it's more likely that he ends up getting a knockout. So I see it being worthwhile in DFS either way. Folks, this is going to be an awesome fight. We got 2 championship fights going on at UFC 297 in Toronto this weekend, the first UFC pay-per-view event of 2024. Let's go.
Break out the red panties.
And thank you for listening to episode 121 of RotoBallers' official MMA podcast, Tap That. Again, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. I'll be making picks for Unified MMA, Uriah Faber A1 Combat, UAE Warriors, KSW this weekend. So check out those picks at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube. Card starts at 6:30 p.m. on Saturday, so I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord from 4 to 5 p.m. and onward, talking UFC 297. Show up. Let's talk about DFS and sports betting strategy for UFC 297. We've got more interlude episodes coming up because we're going to have a week hiatus for the UFC here after UFC 297, so hopefully we can fit in a couple of those. Folks, thanks for listening. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy the MMA action this weekend, and peace.